Natchez Shooter Supplies in Tennessee.
Oh, really? Nice.
All right, we're starting the live feed.
Okay, so am I starting this off?
Yep, start us off. I'll
All
get
right.
the video going.
So here we are with our Saturday legislative update, week 2. This is the 23rd of January. And we're going to hear from our lobbyist, Michael Transu. Again, we have James Shrimpster on. He was on last week, the chair of the legislative committee. We have the president of Washington State FOP, Marco Montablanco. And then we have Jeff and Leah, who are on the legislative committee as well. So we're going to start talking about some updates to some House bills and Senate bills. Give you some updates of what happened last week and that we brought up and talked about, and then some of the stuff that's happened in this previous week so you can get updated and see some new bills that are coming up and what's on the horizon. So I'll let you guys take it away.
Hey, you guys can share your video too.
Okay, hold on. All right. Good morning, everybody. Nice to see you all. Thanks. Excuse me. Thanks, Rob. And thanks for taking a little bit of time today to kind of get a legislative update, which I'll try to make as fun and happy as possible as I can. So high level, we just finished the second week of a 105-day legislative session. So we are 14 days in and about 90 days to go. In dog years, that's 3 months. Legislative session is just getting started. We talked last week a little bit about the first week of session and kind of a little bit of the, not so normal pomp and circumstance that goes on during the first week with everybody, with most everybody, legislative wise, being remote. This week started the week out for probably many of you as the Martin Luther King holiday. That's not the case for the legislature. That's one of the holidays that I get to have a full-on day in Olympia. It's a day that pretty typically in Olympia, due to it being a holiday, is a typical day where there are just tons of buses and tons of people, meeting with their legislators on that day, and rallies and such. And it was quite the quiet place on Monday. The legislature still, nevertheless, remotely met and passed some resolutions honoring Martin Luther King. Couple of just kind of budgetary things, so everybody, just so you're aware, kind of contextual for the legislature. So the House Democrats released a $25 billion 16-year transportation package. It's all associated with new revenue to build new roads and lots of different stuff. So that was a big deal. It's a very aggressive package. And some folks would say jaw-dropping, given the breadth of it. But so know that happened. And then also know that late yesterday, the Senate Democrats released a $2.2 billion COVID-19 relief package that is going to do things like expand testing and vaccine availability, extend support for schools, do some grants for small businesses, as well as some housing and food assistance, contact tracing and testing. Part of that is about $668 million for schools to resume in-person learning. So pretty big deal. I'll have a little bit more detail in a written report that hopefully I can get posted and up later today or first thing tomorrow morning. So that's just kind of a high picture of, where the legislature was just, kind of this week. We're continuing with the remote hearing methods. It's not going so bad. James, more than anybody else, can attest to the ins and outs of testifying before legislative committees. I can't tell you how odd of a thing it is to be doing this remotely and, not being and having the ability to walk in and out of hearings and talk to people. And, James will tell you, when we're down there testifying, it's a pretty nice opportunity to talk with legislators coming in and out of hearings, walking to and from meetings, walking to and from offices into hearings. So it's something that I'm kind of struggling with, and most of my colleagues are who are in this business struggle with a lot. So we continue. Last week, for our purposes, several bills were heard last week. Those include bills with regard to duty to intervene for peace officers, Brady disclosures, bills with regard to decertification were heard as well. And then those companion bills were also heard in the Senate. James testified on a couple of them. Marco had the opportunity to testify on a Senator Cooterer bill in the Senate this past week. As a general rule on those pieces of legislation, I think we were testifying mostly other. I think there are some pieces in those bills that we liked, and there are some pieces in those bills that we didn't like. So you all know, in Olympia, when you testify, when you're signing up electronically, you're given three options: pro, con, or other. It tends to be, it's reflected that those positions are reflected in the record. So a lot of folks, us included, give a lot of thought to where we want to be seen in terms of in favor, opposed, or other. Anyway, so I don't know, Marco, James, if either of you want to kind of comment a little bit on how you felt the testimony went and how you felt it was kind of getting in the room, rejoining and getting out of those hearings.
Yeah, so I'll just kind of recap a couple and then Marco can go, or I can go second, whichever. But what do you want to do, Marco? You want to go first?
You can go ahead, James. I'll go right after you.
All right, cool. So first couple of ones I testified on this week were some positive ones, which is stuff that we've been fighting for years, and that is officer wellness. So those were Representative Lovick, our legislator of the year, and Representative Maycumber from the Spokane area re-sponsored two bills that got vetoed by the governor last year to provide grants for officer wellness, to fund officer wellness programs, both at the department level and nonprofit organizations like ourselves. So the first two bills I got to testify for the week were those two bills. Felt really good to actually be testifying for something that's going to be totally positive for law enforcement. We opted not to testify on the Senate version of the data collection bill. That, or the cert, was it? Yeah, it was
Cert.
Excuse me. That was on Martin Luther King Day. We wrote a nice letter to the chair and the ranking member with our position. And basically we testified for the same in the House. We testified other in the House, that it needs more work. So the next thing that I testified on is Brady reform. So again, our legislator of the year, Representative Lovick, sponsored a bill, and it was heard in the judiciary, which basically, and there's going to be a Senate companion from Senator Dingra, but basically said, hey, you need to come up with a model policy for WAPA, Washington Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, and WASPI, on how Brady should be handled. For a lot of you who don't know, Brady's handled differently in all 39 counties. The positive things about the bill that we really liked was it had a way for an appeals process and a way for an officer to get off there if they were put on there incorrectly. So, and not leave it up to the prosecutor. The reason we didn't testify in favor of this bill, we testified other, is we don't feel it went too far. We don't want a model policy to dictate something that has been used in recent years as a way to put pressure on our members. And Benton County, the Benton County Sheriff is a perfect example of that and what went on with him. So we feel that the legislature, instead of requiring WAPA and WASPIC to do a model policy on both these, how about we convene a working group of all stakeholders, and we develop some standards and put them into law. Let's not drag this process out with and hope that every prosecutor follows a model policy, right? So as a result of that testimony, we now have a working group established, and we're going to meet of legislators and all interested parties. That's going to meet next Wednesday at noon. So I think that is all I testified on. Michael and I took several meetings with individual legislators on both sides of the aisle. We met for the first time Representative Hackney. He's a former U.S. attorney. He's on the Public Safety Committee, a new person on the Public Safety Committee. But it was good to hear another Democratic legislator say, hey, I'm not in favor of police going away. I support the police. I spent 9 years as a prosecutor. I understand there's a need for police. And he heard some of our concerns about some of these bills, and it was a good conversation. We also met with another freshman representative who is on the Public Safety Committee. Her name is Tara Simmons. She's a very good person. I had the pleasure of working with her before she was on the legislature in the Sentencing Reform Task Force. For those on Zoom, the Washington State FOP is only one of two law enforcement organizations on the Sentencing Reform Task Force. It's us and WASPIC. And so Tara got elected, and we had a very good conversation with her about some of these public safety issues. Again, she is not someone that wants to see law enforcement go away. So it was good. That was a good conversation. We also met with Republicans this week. Michael and I did. We had 3 meetings on the Republican side as well. We met with the ranking member and a majority of the Republicans on the Public Safety Committee, along with the other law enforcement groups. We also met with a few of those Republicans individually. The last meeting we had was out of Representative Graham out of Spokane. That was a very positive meeting. And so it's been like the first week, it's been a very busy week for Michael and I and Marco on the Hill. So with that, I'll turn it over to Marco.
Thank you, James. So just to give an update on what I testified to this past week, we had a couple arbitration bills that were seen in the Senate. One was Senator Nguyen's bill. I think that was Senate Bill 5055, I believe.
Yep.
And in that bill, actually, we testified to in support. So there was some things that in that bill that created a little bit more consistency. We thought with the arbitration process in regards to just the implementation of arbitrators during arbitration, hearings, it keeps it under the PERC umbrella, as well as providing an option to have those housed under all arbitration decisions housed underneath PERC. Most of our agencies and law enforcement use PERC arbitrators. It was one of those things that it makes sense. There was one by Senator Solomon that we testified, in opposition for, which went way too far in the arbitration process. And so that was, both of those bills were heard under the same, during the same hearing. I had the opportunity to voice our concerns and what we liked about Senator Nguyen's bill in that hearing. Also, later on, just a couple days ago, I testified on the hiring standards bill. And so that was Senator Cooter's bill, correct, Michael?
5089.
5089. And, we testified to, as an organization as other. There were some things in there that we wanted to make sure that the committee understood and just made sure that they are aware of some potential unforeseen results if some of those things were passed in that bill. And so in the overall idea of that bill being that it would provide a more diverse opportunity for members of our communities of color and to get into law enforcement. And so there was the underlying idea is a good concept. There are some things in there that we wanted to make sure that we had addressed, and so we will continue to work with the bill sponsor and the committee on ways we can mitigate those concerns.
Yeah,
Right.
Marco did a really good job on testifying on that. The intent section of that bill talks about more diversity and equity in hiring. And for us, the bottom line is there's some ways to do that, but some ways you have in here, like making a minimum age of 23 and a minimum of an associate's degree, might have the reverse effect of not allowing those sorts of folks in because of economic barriers and other barriers, family obligations and things like that. So it was a really good, testimony that Marco gave with, we agree with the policy, but, the way you're getting there maybe has some downsides to it.
Exactly, Michael. And I think there's some ways, and I mentioned to the committee, some potential ways we can mitigate those issues in regards to cadet programs, partnering with, community colleges and things like that, getting younger people, more diverse people who are involved early on in law enforcement to get a taste of how it works and get that experience.
Yep.
I would just, I thought Marco did a phenomenal job as well testifying. And these are the type of bills where we can work with the sponsor to make it something that could work for everybody. Because we all know we have a dwindling workforce, right? And the next generation of law enforcement, we should always be out there trying to find and cultivate and get them going down the right path. And so this is a perfect example of us trying to reach out to the sponsor and work with her on perfecting this a little bit.
Yeah, let me just kind of say something about the arbitration bill that Marco mentioned. There were basically, two options up in that hearing, pulling all of the arbitration stuff into PERC versus prohibiting CBAs from addressing a laundry list of like 29 things. And, one of the things for us is a lot of times from a global peace officer perspective, a lot of larger jurisdictions, and smaller jurisdictions as well, their PERC decisions and their arbitration decisions aren't tracked or anything like that. So we hear a lot of anecdotal stuff about how often arbitration decisions are overturned in favor of the peace officer. And there's really no good data on there. Most of it that's out there is anecdotal. So we also felt that this was a good way to track some data so that, informational based decisions can be made and we can all kind of, get off of the, anecdotal thing and, really just kind of make some data driven decisions and from a policy standpoint. So we thought that was another good piece of that.
Hey, Michael, before we jump off of what we did this week, can we just touch base on 1054, the tactics bill and where it's at and kind of just explain really quick for our members what it is?
Yeah. So tactics bill has, all of you probably know, chokeholds, LVNRs, canine prohibitions, armored and armed vehicle prohibitions, no knock warrants, and I'm missing one thing. Pardon me?
The pursuit.
Oh yeah. tear gas. So that bill moved out of committee. James and I had a follow-up conversation with Representative Hackney, who again, as he mentioned, was a 10-year federal prosecutor. We're going to continue to work on that piece of legislation. The Republicans, when that bill came up for executive session, the Republicans on that committee really came out swinging. They put up, I think, 14 amendments on that bill. So it was a lot, and that's really abnormal on a bill, in the first week of session as well. So, in particular, there were some changes that were made for us to that bill on the vehicular pursuit stuff, and removing the training commission's authority to do model vehicular pursuit policies. So that those policies were, as James mentioned on a previous bill, stuck right into the bill. And also we pulled out the CJTC. We got the CJTC pulled out from doing the data collection and analysis on vehicular pursuits, and we're going to move that section. Recommendation, we hope and think is going to happen, that vehicular pursuit data collection will move over into the Attorney General's data collection bill.
Yep.
So we're going to continue to work. We understand that there's some movement, at least a little bit, on the canine piece of that bill. What that looks like, we're going to have to wait till we have our meetings coming up this coming week and see how far the sponsors are willing to move on some of that stuff. We can get down into the weeds on the defensive necessity, which I think would just take really a lot of time, and we're going to kind of continue to discuss it internally. And I think James and I are in the works to meet with Representative Hackney and Representative Johnson, in addition to our Wednesday meeting, to see if we can kind of work through that a little bit. And then over the weekend, I'll have a conversation with Representative Lovick just to kind of get his feel.
So I want to touch base on it, or I want to draw a distinction here. The original version of the tactics bill, it had on-leash canine use for apprehensions. And then all those amendments dropped, and it went from on-leash use for apprehensions to no use on apprehensions. So that is a clear message that the Democrat-controlled legislature is not wanting to do business as usual. That was I want to draw that distinction, because that change in the bill, which held up and is moved out of committee to pass, was a direct result of dropping 1 million amendments on a bill to try to slow it down. So we have to be very cognizant on how we move forward. And as Michael said, we've continued to work with both sides of the aisle to get some movement on the canine part, so that we can at least go back to the original part of the bill. The logic behind that is a majority of the agencies in Washington state use electronic leashes. They no longer use tethered leashes, actual rope tethered leashes. And so if there's an agency out there that you belong to and you're listening and you would like some input, feel free to email us here and make your comment, because it will be considered. Thanks, Michael.
Yep, and I'll just put another comment on that James mentioned. I also, this is just, Michael's gut, no basis in fact at all for this, but and I mentioned, testifying as other and coming across more moderately. I think that amendments like that, a lot of them have their start in testimony that folks give. So I think if you take a very hard line on something in a bill, and you're in the context like we are, there's members out there who will say, well, thank you for your testimony. I gave you a little bit of leeway or a little leash in this case. No, I'm going to pull that back, but thank you for asking. So it's important to be mindful about those sorts of things as you go up and testify. So, and we're trying to do that as well. Okay, so there you have it. That's last week, meetings and such. this coming week. And again, this will all be on a tracking list and noted tonight or first thing tomorrow morning, I hope. 4 bills are up for discussion in the legislature that James will be testifying on. One is House Bill 1202, and that is Representative Ty's Qualified Immunity Bill. We are continuing to review that internally. What I will tell you at a high level, and talking with a colleague of yours, Rob Pride in Colorado, this bill is set up a little bit different than just the outright doing away with qualified immunity, which was the type of bill they got in Colorado and that they're facing in a lot of other states. This bill has some stuff in it, some language in it with regard to having employers be independently liable in certain situations, and looking at officers who follow the directions of their supervisors, giving them a defense. So there's some stuff in there that we're going to take a really hard look at, and we'll go from there on that bill.
Yeah, Michael, just section 3 of her bill says that if an officer was following his department policy or was given a direct order from his immediate supervisor, right, he can no longer be held liable under this bill. When we met with her before she dropped her bill, she said this was in direct response to our meeting with her, where we brought in our national trustee, chairman of trustees, Rob Pride, who is also very politically involved for the FOP in his home state of Colorado. So Rob Pride did a really great job of presenting, hey, here's the situation in Colorado after they passed a similar bill, and the history of this bill. They based it off the Colorado bill. They had communication with the sponsor of that bill in Colorado. So it is dialed down. I think we're going to be testifying as other on this, or probably lean toward opposed, because there's still some things that we have to work on. But that being said, that is the cool thing about the FOP. We can bring in somebody from another state. We can have conversation from our partners in another state about what's going good, what's going bad. To that point, Marco and I had a follow-up conversation with Rob, and apparently it's gotten worse in Colorado. They don't even want to touch the bill they passed. In fact, they wanted to bolster it. And another area that Rob brought up in Colorado that we got to be thankful for, we don't have here, is that their Brady bill, they basically expanded what you can be on Brady for. They had a very liberal interpretation. They're going to go with it statewide. And so think about that in the context where, it seems really terrible here, but this is going on all over the country, and we have to make sure we do what we can to mitigate what's going on here.
Yeah, and I would just add that the other thing this bill does not have is it does not have a limit on qualified immunity. That Colorado bill, I think, has a $25,000 limit. So after that, peace officers become their houses and their cars and their, everything else they can be held personally liable for. That hasn't been tested in the courts yet, but it's something that is not in this bill, which is important.
And I want to say too, in regards to Representative Ty, I think with the meeting that we had with her, she was very open to discussions on this bill and wanting to make things, work with the FOP. And so I give her, kudos for continuing discussions with us and trying to see if we can come up with some type of a resolution.
Yep.
Absolutely agree, Marco. So House Bill 1203 is also getting heard on the 26th. This is a bill that relates to community oversight boards. This is another bill that we're continuing to look at internally. Just a couple of real high notes. It excludes state law enforcement agencies and special purpose districts from this bill being applicable. The the investigations that these community oversight boards are allowed to do really don't have or don't really require any factual basis to get them started. And we had a similar concern in the audit bill where the CJTC is given the ability just to ask, the auditor to do an audit without any factual basis or conclusions that would be used to justify or back up somebody getting into an investigation, or in this case, a community oversight board starting an investigation. We just don't think that's good public policy. And I'll just use my analogy. You can drive a Mack truck or a tank through a broad statute like that, and it's just going to make oversight boards, pardon the pun, all over the board in terms of the way they're set up and implemented. This bill also gives these boards subpoena authority, access to crime scenes and investigations. Although we don't, I don't know what our opinion would be. It allows community oversight boards to have a role in selecting police chiefs, which is is a very interesting concept. And there's just an unlimited, authority that's given to the boards for retention of legal counsel and such. So, there's a lot of bad things in it. We're going to talk about here over the next day or two on where we sit in terms of position, at least other, and we'll see how closely leaning into oppose we have. The next bill that's up next week is House Bill 1267, and this is Representative Entenmann's bill, who is introducing the legislation that implements the governor's police reform independent investigation team task force that James sat on. This bill came out just a little while ago, and we're still reviewing it internally. I think James has had some conversations with some folks on this. And I don't know if you have any comments on how that works for you, James.
Yeah, so I met with both Representative Entenmann and Sonia from the governor's office, who is in charge of running the task force for the governor's office. We have some concerns about the bill as it's written, right? And again, as Michael said, we're going to look at it internally. I do appreciate the drafters of the bill trying to come to the middle a little bit and recognizing there is a place for the independent investigative teams. I'm a little concerned about the training, the aggressive timeline to stand this organization up. I am also concerned about the physical note that was dropped with it. There's a lot of things that are going to make it a little
I'll just
bit.
say the fiscal note on this thing is $29 million.
So
It's an awfully big number.
And just to give some context to that for people who are listening is when we talk about fiscal note, it's what it's going to cost to implement this program if this bill passes in the cities and counties that need to be implemented in, and also CJTC and things like that. So it's totality of how much it's going to cost.
Hey, so we have a comment on Facebook. It's from Jeremy Robbie. It's pretty hard to keep my members from worrying about the qualified immunity bill, even the way you just presented it. And what I would say to that, Jeremy, you're absolutely right. It's hard not to worry about it, but we can't just say no. We have to sit there, and Michael and Marco and everybody on this team has to roll up their sleeves and try to work with people to either perfect the bill or find a different way. And we just can't sit on the sidelines and say, no, hell no. We got to get in there. We got to get our hands dirty, and we got to work. And so what you need to know, Jeremy, is that we all recognize that every police officer has the same concerns you're speaking about. And we have to We just have to keep working at it and see where we end up.
And I'll just kind of add to that. I've never seen, and I've been doing this is my 22nd session. I've never seen a plethora of bills and legislation directed at any industry, and I use that broadly, whether it be, a business industry or, a peace officer industry or a theater industry or liquor industry. There is just a ton coming at us. So part of this too is, kind of the ability to, not get ran over, and then after being run over, have it put in reverse and be re-ran over. So a lot of this is the art of looking at really, really, really bad bills and making them as palatable and as good as we can for the peace officer community. There's a lot coming, and we're gonna have to work really hard, to again not get ran over by everything, and making things as palatable as we can in the context that we're in. We're going to continue to advocate and make our voices heard, but we also need to be mindful of the context we're in legislatively, and also remember, having said all of that, who's in the majority. And it's just going to be one of those things we're going to have to keep after for the next 90 days over and over and over again.
Yep.
And Michael, if I could just, intervene here really quick to answer a little bit of Jeremy's question as well. As an organization, we sit down and try to work with our legislative partners on both sides of the aisle to provide the professional perspective, to provide the professional data that we can, so that way things can hopefully be changed in some ways. And with not all these bills, we're not going to be able to get there, but we are still going to always fight and sit down with our legislators to provide that perspective, so that way they can make an educated decision, hopefully make an educated decision on how to redraft or amend specific bills.
Hey, so Michael, before you jumped on, we agreed to keep this to about 45 minutes. Rob's got an appointment he's got to make too. So I'd like to just wrap this up, right? And how about just go around the room and just do a roundtable? And if anybody's got any input, and then we'll call it a meeting. So, hey, Rob.
I got one other thing, James, before you go.
Okay.
House Bill 1310 is Jesse Johnson's use of force bill that changes the 940 standard and the 1064 standard. We will be opposed and testifying along with everybody else in opposition to that, telling them that it's way too soon to be doing that. The ink on 1064 is just barely dry. The Training Commission goofed up the rulemaking, and we need to implement that before we do anything like this.
Amen.
Sorry.
Amen. So, Rob, you got anything else?
No, I'll take us out here in a few. Go ahead.
Okay. Hey, Jeff and Leah, you guys got anything?
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So, my parting comments. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. We're going to do this every week. Again, if you want to ask questions of Michael or this group, the Zoom link is going to be posted on Facebook before the meeting, about an hour before the meeting. Please join the Zoom meeting, ask those questions. Marco, you got anything?
Yeah, so, just to give a little bit more, information out to our members, as we do our newsletters, digital newsletters every month, we do plan on putting testimonies, links on that newsletter. So if you didn't have a chance to listen to those, Leah will be working on putting those or placing those in our newsletters, so then you can, all of our members and the public can see how we testify.
Excellent. So thank you everyone for coming on this morning, and thank you for those of you that watched us and are going to watch us over the next week. Keep in mind that the FOP obviously has your best interest at heart. It's just at the end of the day, we've got to pick our battles and win what we can to try and put this organization and law enforcement as a whole in this state forward. So next Zoom link meeting like this that you can watch live on Facebook will be at 10 o'clock next Saturday. And we're going to shoot for 10 o'clock on Saturdays until session's over. So look for us then. And if you have any questions of this group, you can put them in the comments on Facebook, or you can contact any of us that are on this this Zoom here this morning through our email or on Facebook or whatever, and we'll be able to answer them next week or get an answer for you. So thank you everybody for watching. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. Appreciate it.
Yep, bye.